Welcome back to another Serve-On Explainer. Today, we're diving into a genuinely fascinating piece of source material. It tackles a pretty bold claim: the idea that a $2 weed, literally something growing in ditches right now, can completely outperform expensive modern commercial water filters. It's a wild story, right? It crosses centuries of history, gets deep into the molecular science, and even touches on the massive economics of the modern survival industry. We're going to unpack exactly what the source claims about this plant, how it mechanically works, the hard field data backing it up, and why the author argues you've probably never even heard of it. The source material actually kicks things off with this stark, almost unbelievable contrast. Picture this. On one side, you have a common plant you could literally pull from a yard for under $2, and on the other, a $200 piece of modern survival hardware. Now, the source doesn't just claim this $2 plant does an almost as good job. No, it states it is measurably, provably better at stripping out bacteria, viruses, and sediment. We're talking about turning brown river water completely clear in under an hour. So, what is this miracle weed? The plant in question is called Moringa oleifera. But to really grasp this mystery, we need to trace the historical timeline the source lays out for us. And this is absolutely crucial because it proves we aren't just looking at some modern internet fad or an untested survival hack. Instead, what we have here is a deeply documented scientific phenomenon. It's been repeatedly discovered, rigorously studied, and then, inexplicably, forgotten over the span of 2 centuries. The timeline actually starts way back in 1817 over in colonial India. A British army surgeon named James Kempthorne was watching his soldiers die from lethal waterborne diseases, things like dysentery and cholera. Well, local residents showed him this moringa tree. They crushed its seeds directly into the dirty water, and get this, within 45 minutes, the water was visibly clear. Within an hour, bacterial counts plummeted by 99%. Kempthorne filed an official report in 1819, but it was categorized and completely forgotten for 160 years. Fast forward to 1981. Dr. Samia Al-Azariya John at the University of Khartoum ran the first modern scientific tests. That research led directly to a comprehensive UN report in 1983, and later a World Health Organization confirmation in 2008. Both of these massive institutions literally called it one of the most promising low-cost water treatment solutions ever identified. Moving on to Section 1, How Moringa Cleans Water, the Science. So you're probably wondering, how exactly does a crushed-up seed turn lethal, muddy water crystal clear? Well, it all comes down to this really fascinating process called flocculation. The source explains that moringa seeds contain what scientists call cationic proteins. Basically, these proteins carry a really strong positive electrical charge. Now, on the flip side, the bad stuff in the water, the dissolved bacteria, the viruses, the suspended mud particles, they all carry a negative charge. And as we know, opposites attract. But at a molecular level, they attract with tremendous force. The proteins literally bind to every single contaminant they bump into, causing them all to clump together. Once they clump, they get heavy, sink right to the bottom of the container, and boom, what's left floating on top is clear water totally stripped of its contamination. Now, the source points out something super interesting here. Municipal water treatment plants actually use this exact same mechanism, coagulation and flocculation, every single day to clean the tap water we drink. But there is a massive difference in how they pull it off. Instead of using a natural seed, industrial plants dump in a synthetic chemical called aluminum sulfate. Let's look at a direct comparison of the two to see why the source finds this whole thing so compelling. According to the source's analysis, moringa accomplishes the exact identical job as the synthetic chemical. But the outcomes? Vastly different. See, aluminum sulfate has to be manufactured, shipped, and paid for during every single treatment cycle. Plus, it generates this unavoidable, toxic aluminum sludge as a byproduct. Moringa, on the other hand, it's just a self-seeding plant. It leaves absolutely zero chemical residue, creates zero toxic sludge, and costs practically nothing. It is literally nature doing the exact same heavy industrial job for free. All right, let's look at Section 2, Hard Data, Field Tests on the Volta River. Now, theory in a textbook is great, but what happens out in the wild in a real survival situation? Well, back in 2012, researchers from the University of Ghana actually went out to the Volta River during major flood conditions. That means the water was at its absolute muddiest and most dangerously polluted. There were no sterile wabs used here, just real moringa seeds treating really, really dirty river water. And the data from that trial, it shows absolutely staggering drops in contamination. Turbidity, which is basically just the cloudiness of the water, dropped by 98.3%. E. coli bacterial counts, they plummeted by 99.1%. And total coliform contamination dropped by 97.8%. On top of that, the source cites a later 2016 study from the Journal of Water and Health. That study found moringa directly matched, or in some cases completely outperformed, standard aluminum sulfate when it came to total bacterial elimination. And again, with zero detectable chemical residue. The lead researcher of that study even went on record calling the outcome scientifically remarkable. Which brings us to Section 3, the billion-dollar filter industry. So here is the billion-dollar question. If the science is this undeniable, and the UN has documented it for literally decades, why on earth isn't moringa standard issue in every single survival kit? Well, the explainer points the finger directly at the massive $4.5 billion water filter industry. Their entire business architecture relies entirely on recurring purchases. Think about it. They sell you a fancy device, but then they have to sell you the replacement cartridges, the replacement filters, the replacement membranes. The whole industry model actually requires that you never permanently solve the problem of clean water without paying them a recurring fee. The source hits the nail on the head here. Because moringa self-seeds and can just grow in your backyard, you simply cannot build a subscription model around a weed. Anyone can grow it. And you certainly cannot patent a natural cationic protein that has been around for millennia. Plus, getting an official EPA certification for an approved water treatment can cost upwards of $3 million. No independent farmer or university lab has that kind of cash to blow on a non-patentable seed. And no massive corporation with a rival, recurring revenue filter product is ever going to fund that application for them. So, as a result, the source argues that this life-saving knowledge remains deliberately buried by financial design. Let's jump to Section 4, the step-by-step purification guide. Okay, so how do you actually apply this out in the field? The source breaks down this exact zero-equipment protocol that's actually used by UN field teams across sub-Saharan Africa. First, you take dried moringa seeds. And by the way, these can store for up to 2 years. You remove the outer shell, and you grind the inner seed into a nice fine powder. You'll need roughly 1/4 teaspoon of that powder for every liter of water. Second, mix that powder with just a tiny bit of clean water to form a thick paste. Third, you're going to stir that paste really aggressively into your contaminated water for 2 full minutes. That rough stirring activates those proteins and spreads them thoroughly. Fourth, slow down your stirring for about 5 to 10 minutes just to encourage those heavy clumps to form. And finally, step 5, let the container sit completely undisturbed for 30 full minutes. As you're waiting, you will literally watch the water transform right in front of your eyes as all that heavy sediment visibly falls to the bottom. Once those 30 minutes are up, you just carefully pour the top 2/3 of the clear water into a fresh container, and just like that, you have water that is 97 to 99% clean. Now, the source does highly recommend one final step, which is boiling the water. Moringa does an incredible job removing the massive biological load and all that nasty sediment to make the water clear, but boiling is your ultimate failsafe. It just guarantees you eliminate any tiny microscopic biological traces that manage to hang on. But think about this. This entire process requires no electricity, absolutely no pumps, zero expensive filters, and it costs virtually nothing. As we wrap up this Servon's explainer, the source leaves us with a really provocative final thought. If a perfectly natural, practically free water purification method has been heavily documented by the world's leading health organizations, yet it remains completely absent from modern outdoor and survival markets just because